We see, subhanallah, Andalus as an Islamic state, Islamic Spain. This was the light of the ummah for so long. The amount of education, just to compare, for example, Al-Andalus to where we are today. Because as I said, no doubt we're at a low point today. Al-Andalus, in 1 year, and remember, we're going back a long time ago. You didn't have the same technology, you didn't have printing presses, you didn't have computers and the internet. In Al-Andalus, in 1 year, more books were translated into the Arabic language than in the entire Middle East today. More books were translated in 1 year in Al-Andalus, going back 1,000 years ago, than the entire Middle East today. This shows that the level of education was so high. This shows how educated and concerned with educating the ummah they were. This shows that we have fallen down today. There's a beautiful story from the history of Al-Andalus where the Khalifa at the time, he wanted to find someone to marry his daughter. And the Khalifa, he doesn't just want anyone to, it was his son. He didn't want just anyone to marry his son. You want to find the best girl available. So he made a proclamation in the city of Cordoba. He said, if there is a family who has a girl that's of the age that's ready for marriage, meaning maybe 16, 20 years old, put a candle in your window tonight. And she's ready for marriage, and she has memorized the entire Quran. Put a candle in your window tonight. They said the entire city was lit up that night. The entire city was lit up because there were so many young girls who had memorized the Quran. So he said, Khair, my son can't marry that many women. So he said the next night, any of you who has a daughter who's of the age to marry, who has memorized the entire Quran and also one of the certain books of Maliki fiqh, put a candle in your window tonight. It was said again that night, not as much as the night before, but almost again the whole city was lit up by candles. I would dare to say that if we were to ask about our entire ummah today, to have one girl who's of the age to get married, who has memorized the entire Quran and one of the books of Maliki fiqh, khalas, any book of fiqh, we would not have a single candle in our windows tonight. This shows the state of the ummah, and this is a sign that we see when our women are educated, the ummah is strong. For the men to be educated, khalas, men are always going to be educated. They're always going to be needed. You're always going to need an imam. But the true test for the ummah is when the women are educated. You see today, most of our women, some parts of the world, the women can't even go into the masjids. They won't even have a space for them in the masjids, let alone educating them. You find, khalas, she knows how to cook and clean, perfect, mashallah, this is all we need. No, they must be educated. This is why Andalus, it was seen as a high time for the ummah to know about Islam. No, I'm not saying for her to go to university and study liberal arts and accounting. I'm talking about Islam. To come to the Islamic centers and to know her religion. We must have this because she is the one who is going to raise a nation. The husband, the father isn't there to raise the children. The mother is. If she doesn't know about her religion, what is she going to pass on? This shows how healthy we are. And the reality as an ummah today, we are very sick. The women know nothing about Islam and our men are very uneducated. So we have to turn this around. As I said, Andalus, more books were translated in 1 year than in the entire Middle East of today. You saw even the technology that they had. Up until today in Spain, they still continue to use the same pipes for their cities that was built by the Muslims 1,000 years back. They have aqueducts where they would take water from the mountains and bring them to the cities in Cordoba. They're still used today. Still used today. This is something amazing. And they say this is better than the pipes that we make today. This is how educated and intelligent the Muslims of Al-Andalus were. How to solve this for ourselves? We can't just become like this overnight. But there has to be gradual steps for this. You go to much of the Middle East today and all they teach them is about how great their nation is and how great their leader is. I remember in Egypt, subhanallah, from the time of Mubarak, you would go in the streets and all you would see, Masr da'iman, Masr awwalan, Masr abadan. They'd say, Egypt before everything else, Egypt above everything else, and Egypt forever. Or Masr falq al-jami', Egypt above all, Egypt above all, above Allah and His Messenger, above the Quran, above Islam. According to Mubarak, yes, this is what he wanted, this extreme nationalism. And they would say we would spend more time learning about how great our nation was than actually learning about mathematics and language and things that you actually need. This is why the nation became so backwards, because the priority of the nation was to indoctrinate them with nationalism. And this is when we become weak, when we don't know our religion, when the Quran teachers are put in prison, when the ulama are persecuted and oppressed. It's not going to be a surprise that the ummah is not going to be strong. So we have to begin with education. No doubt we have to educate ourselves. We have to look at that high point and say, how can I get there? No doubt there are many roads to it, but this is an indicator of where we are. You would find so many of the great ulama of al-Islam came from this land of al-Andalus. Ibn Hazm, rahimahullah, al-Qurtubi, rahimahullah. Ibn Hazm, rahimahullah, no doubt one of the greatest scholars of the ummah. A man who had said his intelligence, you wouldn't find anyone else in his time or the times after him that was comparable to him. And these were people who, many of them were actually converts. Many of them were converts who lived in the land of Al-Andalus. So this time was no doubt a great point of the ummah, that even the kuffar, if they wanted to learn, like today, if you want to get a great education, you say, I'll send my children to Harvard or Yale or one of these Kafir universities. You find, unfortunately, in our days, it might not entirely be like this in Australia, it is to a large degree, but in many of the Muslim countries, when a student gets 100%, he gets a scholarship to go to Britain. He gets 90%, put him into medicine. 80%, put him into law. Keeps on going down. When he gets 10%, send him to the Islamic university. It's saddening, but I'm telling you, this is the reality. I remember when I was in Egypt, I'd had some classes with some of the students from Singapore in Al-Azhar. And I found, subhanAllah, a lot of these students who are studying in Al-Azhar, they've been there for 5 years. They're almost finished their diploma. They can't even speak Arabic. When it comes to wudu and the fiqh of wudu, they don't know anything. You question them, how many sunnah prayers are there for Asr? He has no idea. So you've been here for 5 years and you know nothing. And why did you come here? And he says, I wanted to get into medicine, but my results weren't good enough, so I was sent to the Islamic university. Even in Australia, you'd find, some of the universities overseas, they'll just accept anyone. Can you write your name? Yes, mashallah, get a scholarship to go overseas. This is a problem, that we have to make sure that we're sending the right people to go study. We don't just send anybody. When you see, mashallah, they excel, they get very good grades, they're the ones that we should be putting into the Islamic universities, so that we're getting the best of people with a proper understanding of the religion. So the legacy of Al-Andalus was immense. The amount of scholars that came from this land was unparalleled to many of the other lands. And the Muslims, when they began to, as we said, conquer Al-Andalus, they didn't just stop there. They didn't just stop at Spain. They conquered a large part of France. And they began to go into France, because at this time, after the fall of the Roman Empire, all of Europe was weakened. So all of a sudden you had the Muslims coming in this way and Muslims coming in from the south of Italy. And the Muslims of Al-Andalus, they met the French at a battle that is called the Battle of Poitiers. And this battle, according to some historians, they debate over the significance of this, but especially the non-Muslim historians, they say, had of the Muslims been victorious in this battle, today all of Europe would have been Muslim. That was the last line of defense. The Christians put everything they had. They were led by their leader, Charles Martel, and they were able to beat the Muslims. And the historians, I say, had we not defeated them at that time, we would be praying in masjids today, and all of our universities would have minarets. So we see the power that the Muslims had. That qadr Allah allowed it to be so that they didn't continue into Europe, but Europe was in fear of the Muslims. They would fear, when are the Muslims going to come? When are the Muslims going to come? And this is how they must be. This is how they must be, in fear of Islam. Not that they say, the Muslims, these people can't even keep their streets clean. How are they going to conquer us? And this is the reality of what we find today.